Poetry gave me the field of permission to give a voice, whether that was really vicious, jealous, rageful, devastated, my outlet for all the unspeakable things. But what happened for me was I started hitting writer's block. The muse stopped coming because I wouldn't honor what I created.
Caitlin Howe, also known as the Poet Queen.
Caitlin is a founding coach of Fit for Service and a multi-talented artist whose work spans poetry, ritual, and transformational healing.
With certifications in breathwork, meditation, and Kundalini yoga, she empowers others to overcome shame, embrace their inner power, and create with love.
Caitlin inspires women to rediscover their authentic selves.
One of the most important skills that I think people can develop as a creative is a relationship to their muse. And so learning the texture of energy of the muse and being able to dance in relationship with her. Can you expand on your relationship and how you relate?
My perception of it is that
Caitlin, hi, the Poet Queen in the house. I'm so excited that we've gotten a chance to connect. It's crazy to me that we actually haven't connected ever before.
It really is. I feel, of course, in the social media generation that we're in, it feels kind of like I know you and I've seen you. Like, I think we've been in the same rooms before.
Really? Have we?
I don't know. It's maybe. One of those, you have one of those faces for me personally that when you meet people and you're like, I've met you before. And it just feels like that in my body for some reason, but maybe it was also a feeling of like knowing the future or something. Because here we
inevitable.
are. Because here we are.
We just needed to be working on our books.
Yes, exactly.
So for people who aren't familiar with you and your work and the Poet Queen, please just give us a quick download about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. It makes me giggle when... It's so funny. I gave myself that moniker on Instagram in 2019, and it's audacious. It's a big title to give yourself. Mm-hmm. But I've loved to write. I realized my whole life when I was a little girl, I would make books and write poems. And then for decades, really, I completely got whisked away in all of the other shiny things of life and and abandoned it completely and forgot. And it wasn't until I was in Las Vegas and I was like really going through a dark night of the soul moment in my life. 2014. I moved out there 13. It was 2014 where I really realized I feel like I'm spiritually dying and I have nothing to hold on to. My life had changed a lot, and I started journaling, and I was like, I like this feels good. This feels like the way out. I love doing this. And I forgot. And I ended up going into this little bookstore in downtown Las Vegas where I didn't know anybody, and they had a writers group, and I like walked back there all nervous. And I was like, hi, I want to write, And I ended up writing a manuscript about my time there, which is still tucked away on a shelf, called A Shiny Room in Hell. And I kind of started this whole new path.
Define manuscript. Like, what does that mean to write a
So
manuscript?
I was like, I'm going to write a book about this, like the hardest, most, I think there was a lot of shame in that chapter of my life. It's so funny talking about these things. I suddenly have like the little, it's really interesting when it comes to the tender art. But yeah, I felt like the story, something, I remember Lena Dunham, I was reading her book at that time, and she talks about, there's this moment in her book, Not That Kind of Girl, where she talks about doing it for the story. And it was like some date with some guy or something in the film. And suddenly I was like, well, I feel a lot of shame about this chapter, but wait a minute, this is an awesome story. And like, it started to kind of illuminate to me all of these powerful, meaningful, and really exciting stories I'd lived. And I was like, I want to turn this into a book. So I drove home to Texas, And I lived in my sister's guest house for 5 months, and I just learned everything I could about the craft of writing and wrote it. And it's very raw. It was like the first big writing project I ever did. And I still think it has a spark of life for one day.
Is it just living in
it's
a
just
shelf somewhere?
It's printed and it's living in a folder.
So it is a book.
You
wrote a book. You
yeah.
called it a manuscript. Is it because you haven't wanted to own it as I wrote a book?
Yeah, you know what? That's such a great question. I think because it didn't get past the draft phase, there's a little bit of a story of like, oh, I didn't finish the assignment kind of thing.
Oh.
And it's definitely taught me a lot about resistance with writing, because it's more like, for me at least, it's more like the more raw it gets, the more resistance is going to get in the way of taking that and actually showing it to somebody and being like, here,
yeah.
I made this. I'd like to share
I feel
this.
like every cell in my body is saying that you're going to go back and finish it.
I love to hear it.
It just seems like an obvious thing. Everyone listening to this is,
I'm
very
blushing
clearly you're going to go back and you just need to do the other book,
journey.
other book first, just to go, okay, I can do this, and then go back to that one. So let's wrap up, come back to who you be.
So who I be, the poet queen. So after that venture into my writing, I moved back to Texas, obviously, and I started my healing journey, my spiritual path, and I started working as a teacher and coach. I work in a program called Fit for Service, where I teach emotional fitness is what we call it, but it's very broad spectrum. It's related to the heart, expression, connection, kind of de-armoring the heart through dance. I'm an ecstatic dance guide, and so that is one of my big passions too. I love inviting people to dress up in costume and like unlock these archetypal parts that are kind of hiding behind the mask of the everyday character that we, personify. And so that's been really, really big and powerful in my life. And I'm really proud of that line of work. And on the side, I write poetry to keep me sane, to help me understand myself, and to alchemize, a lot of the suffering, and also to recognize all of the wonder and the beauty in life. And so I've wanted to lean into that for a long time. And in 2019, I remember changing my Instagram handle and being like, okay, the Poet Queen is going to remind you that this is who you are, and to not turn away from it, and to not forget. And then my following grew, and I started sharing poems and stuff. And but it's never really been at the center of my life until this year. This year was like a doorway opened where I feel a new chapter beginning, and it feels like now is the time where I want to take my art and really put it at the center. And, because my job and all of these other beautiful things I get to do in service are so meaningful, it's really easy to put the art on the side, because it's like, oh, this means so much, and this is so such an honor to get to help people in this way. And so the time has come where the Poet Queen, is calling me all the way forward, the way forward.
And what was the shift? Was it a moment? Was it?
Yeah. So I guess how I would encapsulate it is 2 years ago, I remember it was January 2022. And I was like, okay, it's time. I got to put this book together. I see it. I know the name. I know exactly, I've been writing my way through it for years now. And I spent that whole winter just like visioning it and putting it together. And then it got to this point where I started getting really turned off by it. And I don't know if this has happened to you with editing, but like I love to channel the poems. I love to birth them and experience them. But then when I put on the editor cap, there's like another aspect of my personality or my psyche that comes forward, and it was like, this is shit. And it's like, and I got to this edge with it where I was like, the editing part started creating resistance. And then I cycled through that again in 2023. Meanwhile, still writing poems, and then I started feeling this new body of work. And I was like, I wanted to like kind of, I tell myself like, don't share the old stuff. Like there's a new one coming, do this one. And that one was called Ridiculous Masterpiece. And that was about life. The other stuff was about me. The other stuff was about my like personal feelings and the stuff that felt really raw and vulnerable. And it felt very, it was just free flowing emotion. And so it was a lot easier for me to judge that and try to shield it from people seeing it. Because if I were to finish it to, put it into publication, then people would have to see it. And so
had your poetry shifted? Meaning more this is about life. Was that what you were writing? You started very personal and then started writing about life?
Yes.
Okay.
So the way for me with writing and with poetry especially, I think poetry gave me, I'm a very big, fiery, there's a lot of characters going on inside of this creature. Yeah. And poetry gave me the field of permission to give a voice to all of those, whether that was really, vicious, jealous, rageful, devastated. Mm-hmm. There's no spiritual bypassing in poetry for me, and I still like it that way. Yeah. But there's also spiritual truth that I think finally, after so many years of working with my shadow and having poetry be my outlet for all the unspeakable things, I actually had a personal evolutionary process where my heart opened and my mind kind of rose above the drama of Caitlin and started to behold the masterpiece of life. And it did become a very devotional, bigger picture thing. I want to praise life with my work, not just always be working out the viscera of all my shit, Yeah. And so once that started happening, my inner critic got a little bit more turned off by the previous body of work. Mm-hmm. And that became my new, resistance has a lot of great disguises it puts on. So my new disguise for my resistance with the old work was I'm more excited about this. And it was a way that I could avoid ever finishing it. And so what happened, that's somewhat of a mystery. I don't know what to credit the perfect bubble burst thing because this past year has been so powerful for me. I've had some I'm somewhat of a psychonaut, and I'm very ceremonially oriented. And so I've got to connect with and work with some really beautiful ceremonial containers that I think started to really support the somatic and emotional and, kind of lifestyle habits I have that have helped me expand out of some of my fear and shame. But really another interesting catalyst at the beginning of the year was I had breast implants for 17 and a half years, and I had them removed in January. And so that kind of opened Pandora's box of a lot of somatic healing. It felt the banshees of my subconscious started coming out. And on my birthday, I went into a little bit of a sabbatical because I could feel with I'm kind of all over the place here, but I hope it will come together. But,
it's perfect. This is the creative path. It's not linear.
My path is woo, it's all over the place. Lots of exploring pathways and then coming back. Yeah. But what happened for me was with all of that criticism that happened in the first, in 22, 23, where I started to push the poetry away a little bit, and be not yet, and try to perfect it, or change gears, I started hitting writer's block. So it's I felt, my perception of it is that the muse stopped coming because I wouldn't honor what I'd created. Mm-hmm. It was I was saying that it's not good enough. Mm-hmm. And the muse, in its many forms, is all right, well, And so when I went through the surgical process, I'd been in a long rut at that point where I wasn't feeling creative. I wasn't flowing. I was noticing stuck areas in my life, financially, relationally, and I started to really recognize I'm getting away from my poetry in a way that is affecting my health. It's affecting my creative flow. It's affecting every area of my life. And so I went into this sabbatical for my birthday. I brought all my journals with me, and I brought the notes I'd taken for the book, and I sat there and I like kind of locked myself in, and I was like, what's here? Like, I have to bring this to life, because I can feel the way that it's connected to my body's health, like the subconscious processes that I'm confronting in my healing process with the surgery. And then the book really came all together. So like the new collection wove into the personal previous collection, and I saw it and I was like, there it is. And within a couple of months, things kind of just really accelerated. There's a lot I could share there, but a friend of mine, ultimately, Aubrey Marcus, a friend of mine, he reached out to me and he was like, I'm publishing a poetry book this winter with a team, and you've been talking about this for years, and I think you should do it at the same time as me. Let's release them together. Let's do this. And I was like, okay. Like, I needed the accountability or something. The timing just came together where that container of having a deadline and having someone else that I respect and care for, like, really hold me to that and say, you've got this. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. I went all in, and I spent the past 3 months just weaving together this wild collection of mine that's now on its way.
Okay. And there are so many pieces to that I really deeply relate to. And I'm just going, where do I go with this? There's so many places I want to explore. Let's start with let's start with the creative muse and your relationship with the muse, because I find that one of the most important skills that I think people can develop as a creative is a relationship to their muse, because there are masterpieces that never get finished because people think the muse is gone, but it's actually they just need to sit in the alchemical fire of the creative process. And then there are so many people that burn out because they're trying to force something when the muse has left a long time ago, and it's the muse saying, hey, you don't have enough life in you yet. Go out, live, go even just get a night's sleep, go like change your emotional state, and then I'll come back.
100%.
And so learning the texture of energy of the muse and being able to dance in relationship with her is, I think, one of the most important skills. And the way that you spoke about it tells me that you have a relationship with her, the muse. Can you expand on your relationship and how you relate?
Oh, yeah. So I love this question and this frame. It's absolutely true, in my opinion. And I feel like, for me, the muse takes many shapes. Sometimes it's another person. You know, one of my favorite just doorways into writing is I have particular writers that become the muse for me. And so I can literally crack a book like Oracle deck style and read a passage, and there's a breath that it has nothing to do with what they wrote even, but it like enters me that way. And suddenly my own voice is like, it starts to come in. So that's a doorway. But for me, you know, it's all about life experience. It's all about being alive. And so what doesn't work for me, it's paradoxical and interesting, because I do think devotion and showing up is really important. But for me personally, if I put my muse in the box of we're going to get up at 8 a.m. and you're going to look at that screen and you're going to write something.
Which like, a lot of people say to do.
A lot of people say to do. I will be a test case for, it doesn't work like that for me. I have to get into the world, or I have to play. And so anything like for me that engages my Gestalt perspective and broadens my peripheral gaze. I could be driving, but the fact that if I'm driving, I can see the sunset and I can catch, like, you know, the person living on the street over here, or the dragonfly that just went by the window. Something in that broader gaze, it's like the channel is actually open wider. Walking and moving through the world, it's even better if I'm not in a car, obviously. And so movement helps me connect to her. And that includes dancing with my body. But the tricky thing with mine is, I said I have all these characters. I also have a rebel. And so if I'm like, we're going to dance, so we can write a poem. It's like, no, like I almost have to seduce it. Right. And so, like when I was in my sabbatical and I was feeling so lost from my muse, with all of that editor mind and comparison and so much screen time nowadays too. What I did was I set a big altar and I made paper dolls of my own. I cut out a photo of myself when I was in my 20s, a big bobblehead, and I made paper dolls to represent these characters, and I finger painted and I danced and nobody was there. And it was just like a way of me courting the aspect of myself that loves to create. And so ultimately, one of my perspectives on it really is that it's ultimately us. So like my frame, my creative cosmology, your muse would really be you and my muse would really be me. And that takes so many forms too. So, and I have my favorites, like contemporary creators and actually kind of classic creators.
Who inspires you? Who are some of them?
Right now, Ariana.
Me, of course.
Yes, I was. That's a given.
That's a given. Come on.
You are actually a huge inspiration. I'm really excited if we go there to talk about voice too, and expression through the body, because I think that's something that you're, a master of our times with, in a way that I know is on the horizon for me, but there's lots of fear there.
You haven't started performing your poetry yet.
Here and there.
And do you have it memorized?
Some of it.
Okay. Well, we might need to create a little moment
we'll see.
here. We'll see. Yeah, okay.
It's funny being, it is the place I get the most nervous, but yeah, right now I'm musing pretty hard on a poet named Ariana Reigns, who's out of New York. She had one of her books she has 2 books coming out, but one's called the Sand Book. And I really gravitate towards writers who are not trying to appeal to anybody. And I like obscurity in poetry. I like when I don't fully get it and they're like making me go, what? But also, wow. Like there's that duende, like Lorca talks about duende, and
duende,
that's
the little like gnome.
It's like the
energy.
It's like, for me, it's like the je ne sais quoi, like the mystery of magic. The magic. Like I don't know why that poem, like just did this to me, but it does happen. And so for me, some of my own poems, that's kind of where I definitely have some poems in the book that don't feel like they carry the duende magic. But for me, it's that feeling that you can't totally name what happened, but you suddenly are like, wow.
What? Yeah. I'll give you my
There's
frame of what's so I'll give you my frame of what's happening there. So I believe that our life force energy is what is uniquely ours. It is our soul's signature. And so there has never been that signature of energy on this planet before you or after you. And so that life force is the thing that is beating your heart, breathing your lungs. It is that element. Totally. And that element expresses itself through you creatively and sexually. They're actually the same thing, you could argue, but for ease, it's these 2 ways. And so when we move through the world and we see someone that's attractive and we feel a rush of energy, we say we just got turned on. But when it's from a poem or from a place or a butterfly, we say we just got inspired. But it's the same thing. It generated a turn on. It generated a rush of life force. Wow. And so that moment is I think every artist's dream is that my poem will turn you on. My poem will inspire you, and it will transmit my creative life force energy into you in a way that amplifies that creative life force in you. And that's, to me, what it means to be a conscious artist, to know that you have the ability to turn your life force energy into something that amplifies the life force energy, which is actually the most healing frequency that anyone can have, is their own life force being given permission to flow through their body. That is, to me, where artists become the healer. Artists become more than just a poet. They become someone who understands the sacred role they play inside of society.
Ooh, yes. Wow. I love your frame. That's it. I feel it 100%. I think that that's the most, for me, definitely, that's the most rewarding. And I haven't really even called it that in my mind, but the most rewarding zone I can find myself in anything that I'm doing. If I'm guiding ecstatic dance, it's like when I feel the life force start to really come through, and it's not like everyone's like uncomfortable and just kind of like stiff and like going through the motions, but then the space like really comes alive. There it is. And it's so healing. It's so healing. And I think that that's what poetry has done for me. You know, so thank you for giving me that really clarified reflection of what's actually happened for me through poetry. Is it really was that moment where I felt close to death spiritually. Like the spirit in me was so dim that poetry saved me, because it brought that life force back in, and it showed me, oh, this is the way that you really enjoy. And I think when we enjoy something, that's when the most life force comes in, right? So we have to find like what's our creative path that actually has the unique signature that turns us on.
Hence the name of the podcast.
Yes, it's all making sense
it's
to me
full
now.
circle now. And so you have gone an opposite direction with your poetry to kind of give yourself the full spectrum, it seems like, which is, it was deeply personal, and then it became about life. It went from micro to macro.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the opposite. So my first album on Spotify is called Permission, and it's the titles of No More War, Water is Life, which I wrote during Standing Rock, Make America Think Again. Like these pieces that were me observing what was going on, having my philosophical thoughts around it, and then translating it into poetry. But then when you look at my most recent album, which is called The Journey Back to You, that album is entirely about love and relationships on a deeply personal level. Ooh. And that happened because when I made my first album, I was in a 10-year relationship, and I didn't need poetry. I found poetry in that relationship. I was at an event, and it was a personal development event, and everyone had 5 minutes to speak. So it was just like kind of this rapid fire thing. The last speaker was a performance poet, slam poet, and I'd never seen it before. And I just went, I can do that. I know I can do that. And it just unlocked in me. And within days, I actually wrote You Are Who You've Been Looking For, which is the poem that would later go viral years later. It was the second performance piece I ever wrote. Wow. And so
straight in. But I always want to tell people, I said yes to the muse. That moment of turn on, of inspiration, of I can do that. I didn't talk myself out. I just said, sure, I'm going to go home and do it. And so that's really important. And so, but then when the relationship ended, that 10-year relationship ended, I went through a couple years of real dark, hard times. And I had to address how I had thought of myself as this confident guy, as someone who felt safe in the world, as someone who was on purpose and all these things. But I was that
in the relationship. And when the relationship was
I can
gone,
relate.
when the relationship was gone, suddenly I realized I am not confident in the world. The relationship gave me confidence because I didn't have to look at certain aspects. I am not safe in my body. I don't actually feel safe in my body because here I am having PTSD from sexual abuse that had been a repressed memory for 25 years. And that memory had come back while in relationship. And so I worked through it with someone I felt safe with. But now dating, my body was responding in ways where I was realizing I don't even feel safe in this body. Wow. And suddenly my poetry was the place I had to go to express those things. It was the place that when my body wasn't safe and I didn't know what was happening in the world around me, I could put that somewhere. And that was what my poetry became.
Wow.
And so some of those poems on my most recent album were from years ago when I was going through depression. And so I had to go the opposite direction. And I hit a point where I didn't like that my poetry it almost felt as if my poetry was keeping me in this energy of just like emotional masturbation. Like I don't know what to call it. I was
also can relate. Yeah.
It's like, wow, I'm almost getting off on the just depth of sorrow I can put into this poem. And so how did you catch that you were in that? And how do you relate to it now? Because I imagine there's a lot of creatives listening to this who probably have some element of, the pain creates such great art.
Oh yeah, I've got that for sure. I think it's a really interesting way to actually examine your relationship to pain, whether that's that you don't want to go there with your poetry or that you want to stay there. And I think, what a beautiful journey. I'm really happy for you, for one, that you dove right in with the Muse and launched that whole path with your poetry and spoken words so that you could go into that as a resource for your healing process and your heartbreak or disorientation that you felt outside of that relationship, because I think it's an incredible tool. And for me, that was part of actually why I resisted sharing this or publishing it for so long, was because and why I made it a drama, because I was keenly aware after a while, after I kind of developed out of those processes being active in my life, was kind of like, whoa, you are really, there's a little judgment there that was kind of like, wow, you're really looping in pain, and that's like your favorite way for the Muse to visit. And I remember in 2021 really noticing, like, I thought of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and Orpheus's story in the myth is that his wife is taken away and he goes into the underworld and asks Hades to, if I can bring her back. And Hades is like, sure, but you can't. You can walk her out, but you can never look over your shoulder. You have to trust me that she's still there. And of course, they get all the way almost to the sun, and Orpheus looks back and she vanishes into dust. And so the myth of the poet archetype in Greek mythology was a tragedy. So he draws he sings about pain for the rest of his life. He makes all of this beautiful music, and the Orphic hymns and all of these things were all about sorrow. And I realized this was kind of like a unconscious code, that I was in this sort of like grouping of poets that just had to have things be hard and painful, and the suffering was like giving me material. And it was, but there was a doorway out of that. And so the thing that all of that to say, what happened for me was I started to get turned off by it because I had those judgments around it. I really recognized my pattern, and I wanted to liberate myself, which is what the second half of the book, as I kind of expand into the world and the masterpiece of life, it was actually mirroring a liberation that was happening within me, where I started to enjoy making poems about love and beauty and goodness and inspiration and hope. But the rejection of my former self, that unwillingness to share that raw material that was born through the pain, like I was willing to write it, but then I felt shame around it. And I was like, this is not allowing the poetry to do its work. Because the poetry for me was helping me liberate me from that pain. But my own shame around it and judgment of it and like hoarding it and covering it and be like, this is too much for people, or it's not like the best method. That was keeping all of those feelings in the box of shame still. And what I've learned when holding space for people and facilitating is if we compare our art or our experiences or aspects, memories that we have, wounds that we have to other people in a way that we want to hide them, that's one of the most damaging things that happens for us, I think. And one of the most healing things that happens is the more that we express and share what feels like too uncomfortable, too ugly, too shameful. And so I've watched people over and over and over again share their pain, and it's never like, it never doesn't heal. It's never when somebody else, when you hear a poet, or when I hear a poet, or just a human being going through a cathartic moment, and they share about a heartbreak or betrayal or grief being really primary material there emotionally, when that's shared and it's opened up to other people, it's timeless, because there's always somebody in the room that needs to hear about that quality of pain, that experience. There's a resonance that gets to happen for people who are harboring that pain. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, as much as my inner critic wanted to like just transcend the part of me that had this relationship to her art through pain, I realized that that work still has work to do for other people who are going through grief or intense emotions. And as much as I do feel myself evolving and expanding beyond that, with humility, I don't know what's coming next, right? I'm like, I've graduated. Yeah. Ultimately, I think that it's about sharing too. And I think you do that really well with your art, is to write it and to allow it to come through the channel is one part. Then to share it is that next wave of where it gets to really do things in the world that you can't measure.
Yeah. And I think a mutual friend of ours, Blue, she was on this podcast and was talking about the other half of the process is sharing. And when you don't share, you cut yourself off from half of the growth. It's a whole different area of growth. And I've talked about it on this podcast, and I encourage people to listen to that episode with Blue. When you're talking about the bonding that happens through the pain of being human, I find that to be beautifully poetic, because inherent in the pain is the solution, which is that we all can relate. No one escapes this life without pain.
Right.
Suffering's a choice, but the pain, we can all relate to that. And so no matter what the depth of pain you're going through, the fact that that is the very thing that connects all of us is how the yin yang symbol, right? Like the antidote is inside of it. The divinity, the spark of divinity and the pathway home is inside of the fact that we all experience this thing. And yet there's a balance. And I wrote a poem called Misery's Anonymous.
Oh, I haven't heard it yet.
No, I haven't ever released that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why.
That's part of the reason why I want to make a book. I have so much poetry that I've just never released. But the beginning goes, maybe sadness is my vice, that familiar habit, an addiction to suffering in my life. Is there a miseries anonymous? They say it loves company, so surely there must be some group out there sitting on metal folding chairs, meeting in secret so that they can share tales of heartbreak and how life's unfair. And so that poem of just exploring this part of me that was going, I think I'm addicted to being sad. I think that I'm addicted to it. And I think that I might be attracting people in my life who are also addicts.
Yeah.
And
hi, my name is Caitlin, and I'm an addict to misery.
It's funny. That's the next line of the poem is actually, hi, my name is Adam, and I'm an addict.
Wow.
Hooked on sadness. Wow. I try to keep leaving it behind, but it keeps bringing me back. It's baggage. And so it's this whole poem.
Yes.
And
yes.
How do you relate to it now? Because I wish I had been hearing this conversation back then to help illuminate for me that I was caught in a cycle. And I'm not even wanting to imply that the cycle is bad, because maybe it needed to run its course. And the knowing that it was done was when I could see I was in it. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious now, when you look back on that, how you relate to the balance between not getting hedonistic with your sadness.
Well, that's a good question. I can't say for sure in certain ways, because I think it might be a marker of certain things healing and developing. I've definitely moved away from certain patterns that really were perpetuating a lot of those tragic stories.
Like what?
Certain partner choices.
Okay. Got it.
Loved them, not available, not fully available. That was a flavor preference I had for like semi-available.
Semi-available men. Even
Love
worse.
you, but yeah, like
Got
half
it.
in, half out
Got
for
it.
like 7 years. Also, something, to be candid is substances too. I was very much, I love life. And so like, it was like, I mean, I love to guide dance. I love festival environments. I love the feeling of aliveness. I think most of us do. And so like I was a very, very shy, painfully shy is what my mother called me. So this is still present in my body even now, especially when it comes to sharing my art and stuff. But I was a very shy child. And one of the doorways out of that inhibition was alcohol and drugs in my 20s. As I got into college and stuff, it was like, oh, I feel like the inhibition's gone. I can be myself, and I get all this positive social feedback. And that was fun for a while. And then after a while, there was a relationship with those things that was mediating sadness, mediating the emotions that were uncomfortable. So reaching for things to feel better all the time when I wasn't feeling good. And ultimately, I feel like poetry kind of gave me a different way to work with it. Mm-hmm. And I also had many different healing experiences on my path, and started making better choices for myself that wasn't trying to avoid the pain. So for really, I think fundamentally for me it's kind of like that which you resist persists. It's like once I embraced pain more and started to see my relationship with it and be like, you really like this. You're really obsessed with this. Like it's a pattern. That visibility on my relationship with pain paired with, I think, a development of genuine self-love and care, which is like, there's other ways to feel alive. I think a lot of ways I was trying to feel as much as I could, because that felt like I'm really living. And then it was like learning gradually, oh, there's other ways to feel alive than to feel pain. Yeah. And so now I think what I was going to say with all of that is my life circumstances are definitely currently less confronting for that question. I have a partner who respects and is devoted to me, and I have a path, with my career that I really love and value. My last big dance with pain was my father passing away from brain cancer in 2020, and I I can say that was a period of where I felt grace. Instead of being masochistic with it, it was a reverence that I fell into and let myself really write my way through it and really be present. And I think there's an invitation with pain where it can invite us into deep presence with what we value. And there's a way to subtly shift the orientation towards it, which is heart opening and curious, and to really reside in the wonder of what it is that's happening, that's creating pain, that's opening us in that way. And from that place, there's a lot of beautiful juice to create from. So but yeah, I don't know. I guess there's still a possibility that I have to say with my shadow, I'm like, I have to track it a little bit, because that part of me that loved to be in relationship with pain, if I've learned anything from being alive for 40 years, it's like, don't underestimate the parts by telling yourself like, I've transcended that, you know. The right conditions for the right moment of needing to learn something deeper about a pattern that we have, I think they'll arise if necessary to show us how much more wisdom can be found there. And so I like to think I've moved on from such an entanglement with that as a source of inspiration, but staying humble, maybe it's still an aspect for me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the depth in which you answered that. And it's a tricky one, especially when our art starts to gain attention. And suddenly we're now rewarded for those emotions and what we did with those emotions. And I know for me, I was so shut down emotionally growing up. My dad's from the Philippines, and very stoic Asian role model who very early on, I had a really powerful experience where I was crying, and he said, you know, if you're going to fight, then fight, but don't cry like a little girl. And so just emotions, not safe.
Yeah.
Right. And so very shut down. And then in a soul searching in college, I found my way back to acting, because I used to love it as a little kid in school plays.
Yes,
and I started doing it. And then I found this was the place where I could put my emotion. And not just that, I created the feedback loop that the more deeply I felt, the better I was, the more accolades I got. And so it was this feedback loop of allow, and as actors, we really romanticize those dramatic roles, you know, of crying, screaming, the pain,
I probably
and
should have been
anguish.
an actor.
And so I fell in love with that as my first outlet, and it really saved my life, because it was a pressure release valve for so much that was being built up. And then it became my poetry, and a reality show that I made, and all of these things where I was just able to put all of this pain, and it was getting me attention. It was making me money. It went viral, like all of these things. And that added this element of trap almost, of being like, wow, here I am being told how much I'm respected for how vulnerable I am or how raw I am. And that can be its own insidious mousetrap. And so I think that the level of introspection that it requires to catch those and notice what we've built around ourselves consistently is so important. And I appreciate you talking to your process around it. And we have evidence, primarily my relationship is with the Sufi poets when it comes to ecstatic bliss. There's a book called Love Letters to God, which are this collection of not just Sufi poets, but Saint Francis and all of these poets, and they're all ecstatic bliss poems, making love to the divine.
One of my favorites is Alfred K. Lamott. I don't know if you've got a big recommend for everybody listening, but he's like a contemporary kind of channel like that.
Right. And beautiful. I always thought, I don't think I've ever written a poem like that. Interesting. And I imagine it's in my future because I feel a desire to go there. And I'm curious for you as a creative, what do you feel you're being called into now? What's the development of your creativity?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So what a great question for me. So I'm actually wearing, to speak to that process for myself, my book that I just sent to print is it's a combination of two different collections. The first one was my personal, which I wrote all of that work with a red pen because I had a dream in 2020 where I had this repeated series of dreams where there was a red pen present. And so with the dream work that I do, if I have a really big dream, I will bring some element of that dream into the material world. And so with that, I felt this connection of the red pen signifying blood. So it was like bleeding from the heart through the finger, the things that are inside of me that didn't have another way to get out. Mm-hmm. And over time, as that kind of evolved and that was simmering in my creative field, and I was growing and evolving, I started to have more experiences with life that felt like they were touching into my facet of that sort of mystic, poetic relationship to the divine. And so for me, what ultimately happened was the red thread was my ink. And the red thread was moving across the page, and it was like almost bleeding out the catharsis of my heart. And over time, I started working with the red thread as a symbol of that. I decided to wear it. I was like, what can I bring onto the show that symbolize? I have so many treasures that signify my creative work and my soul work. And as I built a relationship with the red thread as a symbol, I started kind of courting the divine feminine. And so there's this whole mystery lineage of red thread kind of symbolism in mystic writing and scriptures and different philosophies around the divine feminine, ultimately representing the matrilineal cord or the umbilical cord that connects you to the mother. And so for me, when I fell in love with the divine and with life, enough to start writing about it instead of the man that wouldn't, give me the relationship that I wanted or whatever, that I also kept choosing. That was when a really big shift happened for me inside of myself. And I started moving in more of the direction of, which also felt a bit audacious, to write love poems to the goddess, which is really kind of where I ended up most recently. And I think for me, something that feels, because I've been so kind of in this container for a few years now with the personal work and the more divine romantic work to the masterpiece of life, I've really recognized that in order for me to even listen to what's next for me, that had to be born. There was no getting around, I'm just not going to do it, because then the channel shut. And, like I said earlier. And so part of the answer to your question with all of that said is, in this moment, I'm in this beautiful new breath of being able to listen. And I see a convergence of these aspects of my passion with performance, because I really love to take people on journeys with dance. And I use words and, kind of poetic guidance for dance experiences. But I can see another kind of challenge that life is kind of laying up for me. All right, you gotta perform this, and you gotta share some of this with your voice, because I think there's something, I don't need to tell you, but I can feel it in my body that there's an integrity that will come with practicing, getting comfortable, letting those voices move through my body instead of just through the ink, and there's a deeper level of healing there. So I feel like what's next for me is something to do with the nature of the heart, really performing and expressing the work that I've written, which is edgy, and listening, finally having the space to listen after giving birth to this big project.
Well, I can't think of a better time than now for you to share a poem. Would you be willing to?
Yes. Let me kind of posture up here.
Oh, so look at what happens somatically in the body.
Because I'm nervous. I haven't. Let me see. I'm just gonna be so honest. I get so shaky when I share my poetry, and it's so funny because I speak publicly often, but it's a different kind of beast. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I can. It's really been a while since I've done one without looking, but I think I can do this. I'll do Welcome Back. So the last chapter of my book is called Eden, and this is the first poem from that section. Okay. Welcome back to Eden, where everything can hurt you. And we celebrate that because it means we can feel. And everything dies by some awful surprise. But we delight in that deal because life becomes from it. Priceless and fantastic and exciting. Death makes life matter. And matter is what we get to enjoy. Our unique gift here in the tangible dimension, full of God's every invention. You see, Spirit made itself a home in all of known creation for this pleasure celebration. The proof is in the existence of velvet, and the tickle of the grass in between our toes, and the rose, known only for her fullness by sight and touch and nose. And fruit is only sweet because we can taste. It would be such a shame to let shame waste this place where we get to know hot just because we know cold, and appreciate young just because we grow old. And if we're honest, we'll confess that even crying really does feel as good as the drugs on this planet of experiences tailor-made for the senses. Welcome back to Eden, where we're obsessed with penetration. Because the deeper you can go, the greater the sensation. And if you look at it that way, sex can't be a sin. And we could never be cast out of what we exist in. You see, there's no skin in the other dimensions. I want skin in the game. I double down on my bet that we chose this right here because it's the best place yet. It only feels like hell every time we forget that this right here is Eden.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. I love that line. There's no skin in other dimensions, and I want skin in the game. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. I love that.
Oh, man. It flows a lot smoother when you're not rolling on camera. But
yeah, absolutely.
I was like, what is the line? Okay, we got this.
Bring the mic back.
Yeah.
Bring it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
worries.
I needed a little air.
Yeah. Really, you just like push the audience.
Do you ever get
away for a
nervous? I
moment.
don't know.
I sometimes, it depends on how you look at that semantically, nervous, right? Because for me, the experience of nervousness and excitement somatically in the body is the same.
Yeah.
When someone's nervous, they're focused on what could go wrong. And when you're excited, you're focusing on what can go right or well.
I love that.
And without using right or wrong, right? But you know what I mean? And so it's really the meaning that you give to the sensations. And so most often I'm capable of going, I'm so excited right now, about to just like hit some people with some shit. And but I get nervous. I most nervous I've been recently was talking to high school kids. There's a group of 200 something high school kids, and that I got super nervous because I could feel like these kids weren't there for me. You know, I was brought into the National Leadership Academy and to speak to these kids, and I mean, they're hard. They're hardcore, you know, and you know they're gonna judge you and talk like it's just
so
this
true.
thing.
High school,
and I felt I was back in high school, and I went,
Wow.
oh my god, I hope they think I'm cool. I hope, you know what I mean. I want to fit in with these high school kids.
Wow.
And it brought me back to high school, so I got nervous. And then I performed recently at my friend's wedding, and I really wanted to, you know, do honoring to their union when they asked me to perform a poem, because poetry has been such a big part of their union. And so I got a little nervous then as well. And so, yeah, it's rare, but when it's happening, I go, hey, you're thinking you're going to screw up. You're thinking you're going to forget the lines. You're thinking you're going to whatever. And that's where the nervousness gets defined. And that's where I also lean into the preparation. You know, before I do one of my live events, which you would love if you ever get an opportunity to come to one. Because,
I will make sure to.
It's called Poetry and Possibilities, the most recent incarnation of what I do. And I'll show up with as many poems memorized as I possibly can. Wow. The most and most of mine are between 3 and 5 minutes each. So the most I've ever been able to memorize is 15. And so I show up on stage, 15 pieces memorized, but no idea how many I'm going to do, where it's going to go, what order, and it's a co-created experience.
Wow.
And so that requires me, if you saw me prepping for that, every day for 3, 4, 5 days leading up, I'm rehearsing every single one. And so when I'm on stage, I'm not questioning whether or not I can go to that one. I'm like, yep, I can get to any of these. Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked some of the poems that I've written, because I have a kind of a variety of subsets. With some are spoken word, some are journal style, some, you know, just very, very broad spectrum. But usually when I've worked with a poem in spoken word, I will sit with just that one, because it has something for me that's giving me life. And when I speak it, it's like I'm feeling the power of it. I haven't been practicing with any particular one in a while, but the Welcome Back was one of the more recent ones that I kind of, you know, walked around the house and did it. But there's something about accountability, like the fact that you put yourself in the arena and you're like, I'm making an offering. This is a night. This is an experience where I have to deliver something. And I think there's something about that with me, and, you know, having the nudge or the invitation to publish now, or, you know, if I'm going to share something at open mic night, or sometimes I go to James McRae's Sunflower Club here in Austin and stuff. And then that container will call forward something I would probably avoid otherwise. So yeah, mad respect for the 15 poem.
Well, it's gonna happen. Right. And if would you like a tip around
Yes,
that?
For sure.
So I was an actor in Los Angeles. That was my previous, before my spiritual awakening and different things. But one of the tips that I've taken from that is memorizing monotone. Because what happens is most people memorize things the way that they want to say it. And then it creates a habit around the art. And on a given day, you might be processing something that has you feeling really angry. And so your love poem delivered with that anger in it will create an entirely new experience that's so real for you that it keeps the art giving back to you. And it's more real for the audience. And so You Are Who You've Been Looking For is my most viral poem. And if I were to memorize it, is you are who you've been looking for. So stop looking for more unless you're looking in a mirror, because it's about time for you to see clearly that you are who you've been looking for. So it's like, I can do it like that.
I never would have tried that.
Right. And so if you can get to a point where you just monotone, just can go through it where it's robotic. Now, when I show up to do that piece, I'm not performing that piece. I'm allowing that piece to be born in the moment.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a little way I approach it that might be helpful.
Very cool. Yeah. I usually can't really get on board with a poem, like with the process of speaking it, until it has the whatever kind of quality of pitch or tone, or like I almost have to feel the character. And it hasn't really occurred to me how much of a box that can be, you know, because it's going to do the musical thing where you kind of play back the song. It's like, I know how the song goes, right? So
but there will be a cadence. There will be just like a musician, they will sing it more or less the same, but there's ooh, that was different tonight. And being around musicians that go, that part today, I've never done it like that before. And it's just these cool elements. So that'll be fun for you to play
I'm
with
excited.
as you step into that.
You're inspiring me.
Okay, so I'm gonna land the plane here with our with 5 questions that I ask at the end, and these questions are based off of, I lead a incubator program called the Artistic Entrepreneur, and it's about helping people walk a creative path to build the life that they want around their creativity and be able to monetize it and build sustainability in that, right? And so there's sort of 5 steps that I take people through that lead to these 5 questions. The first step is identifying your core conflict, because that is the core wound conflict that shows up at every stage of this journey. And so I'm curious what your core conflict is.
Ooh, I'm sure this is almost universal, but just right off the tongue, it's shame. It's about overcoming shame that keeps me from being who I actually am and expressing as the full spectrum being that I actually am. And I'm still clearly burning through that.
It's the core conflict. Is that correct?
Core
Thank
conflict.
you for sharing.
Me and shame.
And so once we've identified the core conflict and can have awareness, we can now work through it, because that's actually the path for our growth, right? And so then I take them through these other steps. And that second one is developing your 100% certainty offer. And so this is kind of like your superpower, where when you have 100% certainty that you have something that the right person receiving that thing will have their life changed, you move through the world differently. There's a confidence of, I can do this thing and I know that. What is that for you?
Is meaning like the way that I be or the thing that I offer?
Whatever it means for you to with 100% certainty. So if I said, hey, I need you to help this person in some way, shape, or form, with 100% certainty you can with this. How?
Oh my gosh. Oh. This is interesting to answer because it takes a lot of different shapes. But like my easy go-to, it feels a little bit too, like I'm being too easy with myself. But anytime I can curate an immersive experience for people where they get to participate, and I'm doing that from a place of creative design, and that can take many shapes. That can be a workshop, that could be a dance, that could be a container. It could also be a performance, but that's my favorite zone to be in. Okay. And when I craft immersive experiences where people get to play and participate, I have absolutely no fear when it comes to that.
I love that. We should collab on a poetry event.
Yeah, we should. I would love
absolutely. If that's
Hell
a genius of yours, I love it. I do it. And we could probably create something dope. So there's your 100% certainty. And now we move into crafting signature content. And what I mean by signature content is there's the thing that when people experience it, they get your essence. And they're like, oh, I get Caitlin. I feel her in that thing. What is that?
Man, it's, let me feel for a second. I already know I'm a little bit cheating here because I already work, I work in events and service with people. And I think if I was getting feedback from both my body and from the people that I work with, everyone loves the ecstatic dance, particularly the costume and ecstatic dance experience. Now, I don't want to cling to that because I'm about to birth all this poetry. I'm like, what else could it be? But I think there's a marriage there that could happen, and probably does, because I'm in my channel of I'm become the muse when I'm doing that. But yeah, anytime I can get people to put on a costume and show me what's really happening inside of their hearts, where it's the thing.
Yeah. And it's not cheating. I mean, you've gotten to this point, like your poetry book will be that as well, right? A signature thing that people, they go, wow, okay, I feel you. And so we get more and more of them, right? I have 2 albums. They both do that, right? You listen to this last album, you know me. Yeah. And so once you've crafted this signature content, the next step is what I call dating your audience, which is really about how do you build an authentic relationship with your audience, and how do you approach that?
I think 2 parts. One is I tell them the truth, and I reveal myself, I guess, is another way to frame that, and to really care about them. I think it's really easy to get lost in, self-referencing kind of loops of how do they feel about me. And if you ask yourself the question of how do I feel about them and let that care come all the way online, then the rest of that just dissolves because it's all in that direction. So when I'm working with people, I try to remember, what are they going to feel safe in? What are they going to what's going to be edgy but also exciting? And how can I also be really a beacon of care that they can really feel like I'm paying attention. I see you. So yeah, revealing myself and caring.
I love those. I love that. Really caring.
Really caring.
Really caring is such an important piece. And so thank you for voicing that. So once you've done all that, the final step is building your monetization ecosystem. And this is where it's time to, okay, how do you monetize? And I'm curious how you've approached the business side of this. And I can relate because the vast majority of my income for 11, 12 years now is coaching. And so while my poetry is the thing that often goes more viral and has built a lot of my following, it's monetized through coaching. And so I'm curious how you've approached business and monetization in relationship to your creativity.
Well, it's interesting. I'm on a kind of a dawn of a new chapter where my intention is to really step into my own lane more as a creator. And I've had the blessing and the comfort zone of getting to work on a team of 6 coaches for the past 6 years. And so working with an incredible ecosystem of creators that there is undoubtedly power in terms of monetization when it comes to your network and being able to share your gifts alongside and with other people that have reach and have influence that you respect. So I've had that blessing, and it's vulnerable to step off into my own lane a bit more. But for me, I'd say fundamentally, as somebody who still has a lot of experience to develop in terms of the business side of my art and my offerings, I do deeply believe that listening to what you're excited to create, what actually has, that when we talk about that inspired feeling that a poem gives, if you're offering something and putting something into the ecosystem of the marketplace where it's like, buy my class or register for my membership or buy my book, which is going to be the next part of my vulnerable acts out there in the marketplace of the world. You got to get your system all the way online. And if you're forcing it, if it doesn't feel like you got that quality of inspiration that's like, I'm proud, I'm excited, I believe in this. If that's not in the body, I found that the feedback I get monetarily mirrors that. And so I really listen when I'm not feeling inspired by an idea that I'm trying to like really force out there. So inspiration and also, I think finding a dynamic way to reach more people in terms of, I've done retreats that are, $4,000, and it's like a bunch of people can't go to that, you know, and it's like, how can I bring people into the medicine that I'm offering on a level that can meet everyone that's interested and like really earnestly desiring to learn from me or receive from me. And so having a kind of array of different options for people that give a little bit of that medicine in different ways is an important way for me to be able to keep that dynamic too.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. When my poem went viral, 40 million views in 48 hours, thousands of messages, and I didn't have what you're talking about. And so all these people actually wanted help. They were reaching out, can you help me love myself more? And I couldn't.
Oh yeah.
And that was a huge lesson for me around building out the business. It's not about making money. It's actually, how do I provide the thing that people actually want in an easy way for them to access? And so, a really important piece. So thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
Caitlin,
thanks for asking.
This has been amazing. I've really enjoyed getting to drop in with you finally. And why don't you let other people know who are listening and watching this, how they can follow along, get your book, all of the things.
Yes, I'm so excited. So it's very new. I'm still kind of waiting for the absolute launch date because we've got to get all of the copies back in and just check all the boxes. But it's scheduled to tentatively come out on December 12th, maybe a little bit sooner. It's called Ridiculous Masterpiece. It'll be published through an independent publisher called Chakaruna Media. So you'll be able to buy directly off that website when it's ready. But just tag along with me for the adventure on Instagram at The Poet Queen or on my website, poetqueen.com. I'll be announcing all of the different places that you can find the book, and I'm going to have an audio book that for people who want to listen instead of read. And yeah, I'm really, really excited for everything to come, and I'm really excited for your book that you're going to be creating, and just so stoked to have another friend of the way of poetry and being in this dance with the Muse, and just to discover what you'll create. So thank you so much for having me and all of the juicy wisdom I got from this conversation.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for coming in and making it happen. And thank you for everyone who's walked the creative path with Caitlin and I today. If you've gotten value from this conversation, please help spread the word by sharing it. Send it to someone that you love. Have a conversation around it. And if you share it on social media, please tag us so that we can see what you're gaining the most value from. It really makes a difference for us as a community and collective to be in this conversation around how to amplify our creativity and walk the creative path in a good way. So always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Have a beautiful and blessed day, fam.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you are interested in building a life that you love through the 3 pillars of relationship, business, and creativity, then I encourage you to continue checking out more of my content, including this video, which I really think that you will like.